Hey everybody, I am Philip Bloom, and today we're going to talk about 3 easy steps to recreate classic Hollywood headshots. Today, this is an opportunity to remind ourselves that photography is really fun. And to me, one of the most fun things is to go in, stretch my skill set, jump out of my wheelhouse, and try to reverse engineer a photo, just like you do when you're a beginner, right? You're looking at photography all the time, trying to think, how is that lit? And even as a professional, as an experienced photographer, when you go to a new genre like classic Hollywood headshots, it's something that most people don't shoot anymore. And it's pretty unique, so you can get back into that zone. So the 3 steps that I want to take you through: reverse engineering some classic headshots, we'll look at those, to choose what kind of lights to use, and then we're going to position those lights and take the shot, see what kind of results we get. I've got some images that I like, that I think represent the era, mostly Humphrey Bogart. Let's look at about 5 things that I think define these images. You can see, generally define your key light pattern by finding the shadow on the other side of the nose. You can see the shadow right here under his nose. The same dark shadow here. Here again is that loop. Here it is again, that loop of shadow under his nose. And here it's a little bit harder to define, but we can see that his cheek is lit slightly and that loop appears here. So what we're getting is a real consistent loop lighting rather than a Rembrandt lighting or a butterfly light. The quality of light here is pretty easy to pick up on. A lot of what we shoot is these days for contemporary, commercial, that sort of thing is very soft, but just look at the contrast here. There are deep shadows that you can't even see, barely see information, and then there's highlights that look almost blown out. Whenever you see that harsh line between shadow and light, you know that you've got hard light. Contrast, that's really the ratio of light. Generally, we want our subject to be a little bit brighter than the rest of the image, so they really pop off the page. But isn't it unique what they did back, in these images? Oftentimes we have a super bright background, something to help separate the subject from the background, and yet the subject himself is kind of dark and understated. It gives sort of a gritty, realistic environmental feel, and I think it's a perfect example of breaking the rules in order to create something original that still works. The background in all of these movies is also a dark, moody scene. You can see all of these are very dark backgrounds. They don't disappear completely, but they're mostly dark. Even this one that has kind of a cookie that has been shot through to give the shape around his head. He's lit behind, but the scene itself is dark and then light is added. We're not going to make a nice, smooth background transition. There's going to be stuff going on here, some unevenness. And then finally, the pose. You wouldn't think too much about a pose being important. It's just a headshot, right? But there are a few important things here that are consistent almost throughout. For one thing, this is kind of a classic example of a 2/3 portrait. He's looking away from camera so that his ear is just hidden. You can see you see the ear here, but there's nothing here. You can see this ear, but no ear. And in James Cagney's case, the same. You can see the ear, no ear here. This is the rare example where you see a little bit of that other ear, and you can see both. But overall, that's the trend. We don't get a big view of his neck in any of these. His chin is always falling below his neck, partly from his leaning forward and partly from the slightly higher camera angle. But we want to have that distinct jawline for sure. And I think if we can recreate that, then we can recreate something within this classic Hollywood genre. All right, so now all we have to do is choose the lights we're going to use for this, okay? A light is a light. You can almost use any light at its base, whether you're using some quick pocket strobes. We're in the studio, so we're going to use what's at our disposal. And I've got some of these large studio strobes, my old school Alien Bees, very manual. What really matters is the modifier, right? So what kind of shape of light are we creating? We talked about it. We want hard light. We want high contrast. So generally in the studio, I might be using soft boxes to kind of soften the light on my subjects for that more modern contemporary look, where we have a gradual shift from shadow to light. It's very appealing. You don't really think about the lighting. This classic Hollywood look is all about the mood. It's about that mystery and that emotion. So instead of a softbox like this, which kind of spreads light onto your subject from every angle, filling in the shadows, we can use a hard light, take away the modifier completely, and this is what's inside. Now, I'll use a strobe like this on commercial shoots sometimes in the background, and it's just going to disperse light everywhere for great kind of starbursts and what looks like the effect of sunlight, omnidirectional light that just fills a space. But we can't do that in this case because we set a dark background, a dark, moody scene. We don't just want light everywhere illuminating everything. So how are we going to accomplish that while still creating a hard light? Well, you can use something like, this will come with almost any studio strobe. This is just a dish that we're going to put around the light, around our strobe. And now, instead of light coming out this way, we're going to really focus the light as much as we can in one direction and really just hit myself as the portrait subject right where we want to. Create those shapes along the collar, create that edgy feel. So that light spread is going to be around 120 degrees. And I think we probably want to control that even more. So what we could do is take, here's an example. This light that I have on a boom stand has a grid. Take it right off here and find some way to apply it onto our flash. All right, so we've just set the lights up in terms of direction, and I want to show you how we did those. So we have basically a 3-light setup. We didn't have to use a light on the background, although you could do something creative, like shine a very direct light on the background behind my head. So we started with the back lights, but we simply used a little bit of this handy gaffer's tape. You should always have some gaffer's tape to stick our softbox grids onto those bare lights behind us. So I've got one that I wanted to use to really recreate this image. Now, this image has the highlight on the right cheek of Bogey there, Humphrey Bogart, but in my case, my quote-unquote good side is my left side. The reason for that being, everyone mostly has their nose sort of tilts one direction or the other. And my nose really tilts this way quite significantly. So if you light this side of my face really heavily in a high contrast situation like this, you'll see a really bright nose that kind of passes the center point of my face and it looks kind of distorted. So to lessen that, if I light this side of my face, then it looks like a smaller bit of nose lit. And this can fall into shadow and be less distracting. So we're going to reverse this whole picture. I'm just going to light my cheek. I want to draw my brim of my hat here to kind of shadow my eyes. Usually we're putting light into the eyes, right? But this is a whole different mood. So it's okay if we have this bright hot spot on my cheek and everything else goes dark. We did a couple test shots and we dropped the height of this boom stand pretty far down to make sure it's not lighting the top of my hat too much. It was just really bright up top and there was no real shadow on the hat. We wanted this light to be super high. We kept bringing it in closer and pointing it down more. Remember, what we're going for is like this stage light look, right? Old Hollywood was barely removed from all stage plays and they're still lighting the scene almost like a stage in a theater. This being up high gives my hat a nice highlight, whereas my cheek down here is highlighted and it creates a nice line, a nice sort of contrast and highlights up high and down low that sort of cause your eye to circle around in the image and stay in the image for a minute. Most important here is the key light. In my normal work, the key light would be somewhere out in front, to the side, but in front, to add a little light to the whole face. In this case, I have the light 90 degrees right beside me. It's not gonna light anything other than this side of my face. I've got it up a little extra high. I'm gonna be seated. Normally I would have this light just above eye level. I've got it nice and high so that the brim of my hat will actually shadow my eyes. We're all set. I'll just sit in place of my assistant here and take a couple test shots.